Hey, what's up? It's Jesko again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. And I'm gonna do another reaction video for you, because the last one I did was such a hit. I'm gonna link it up here now. I thought I'd do another one. So I found this video of this quite obscure little mixer called Chris Lord-Alge talking about monitoring. And he says a few very good points that don't get talked about too often. And I thought this is a good opportunity to revisit some of those techniques that we should be employing, that we should be using when we're mixing, when we're monitoring, when we're listening to music in order to get consistent results, in order to be able to better trust what we're hearing. Because it's not just about the acoustics in the room, it is about how we use that system as well. But before we get to that real quick, if you are in the process of treating your home studio, or you're thinking about acoustically treating your home studio, but you're getting stuck because of all the different tips out there, you don't know what is right for you, what you should be focusing on to get started with your room, or even to just take it to the next level, I've got a home studio treatment framework for you that you can download for free at the link in the description. These are my 5 steps to treating a room and getting it to translate. So this is the exact process that I use when I treat studios, and that I kind of discovered throughout the years of treating home studios, in order to not be turning in circles with all the things that come into play when you're building out your room. So obviously, finding your listening position, setting up your speakers, how to work with porous absorption, when to include measurements, when to include a subwoofer, how to think about resonance absorption. All these things are in there, but laid out for you step by step, so that you know exactly what to focus on at each step of the process of treating your studio. So again, if you are in the process of treating your home studio, if you want to figure out how to get started, how to be smart about treating your studio, then I want you to download my home studio treatment framework at the link in the description. But with that, let's jump right in and have a listen to what Chris Lord-Alge has to say.
Mix tips from CLA. All right, Yanni, here we go. Another one. One of the very important ones, well, they're all very important, but one that you have to make sure that you take, your monitors. How are you listening? How are you mixing? Are you on headphones? Do you have monitors? Okay. Make sure that these monitors are set the same way all the time. Make sure that you listen to something you know before you start. Okay. Now, for me, it's different because I'm always in front of the same ones. I'm used to it. And I always listen to something I know on the speakers right before I mix.
Did you just get that? So he's literally referencing other music every time before he actually starts working on a mix. And this is so important because it kind of resets, it recalibrates your brain in that exact moment to what your speakers sound like, right? Our memory, our auditory memory, the way we reflect, or the way we remember sound, that time period is so short that it's actually very difficult to remember the exact detail, the exact texture, the exact kind of quality of sound for any lengthy period of time. And if you're kind of sitting down to mix for the first time on a particular day, and you kind of had a big breakfast, or the sun is shining, or I don't know, you kind of walk 20 minutes to get there, your brain will hear sound differently. And it's really important to kind of reset, to neutralize your brain, to condition it to the exact situation that you're in every time before you actually start working. But let's continue.
This way, there's no surprises. Be aware of what your monitoring is, and monitor at the same volume the whole time.
Wow, right? Monitor at the exact same volume every time. Yeah, and the reason for that is that our hearing, the way our hearing apparatus, so the ear and brain combination, actually changes the sound depending on volume. Maybe you've heard about the equal loudness contours or Fletcher-Munson curves. So this is basically the frequency response of the brain, of the hearing machine, if you will, and it is volume dependent. So if you're constantly changing the volume while you're working, you're actually changing the frequency response of the brain. And just imagine how difficult that is, right? I mean, as an analogy, think of maybe somebody editing a movie, editing a film, right? So this person comes into the editing suite and they rely on their monitor to give them a true calibrated impression, recreation of the colors, for example. Yeah. So let's say the color has a slight kind of tint of orange. Then you're obviously gonna change, or you're gonna calibrate, you're gonna color that piece of film differently, because you're perceiving all the colors differently, because the screen is giving you a slight orange tint, right? But on top of that, now imagine as you're working, the color calibration of the monitor actually changes. So it kind of goes from like a little bit orange to a little bit green to a little bit blue. And if you're not aware of this, well, first of all, even if you are aware of this, it is supremely difficult to work that way. But if you're not aware of this, you basically can't work. Yeah. And so that's the same sort of with sound by changing the volume. Yeah. So you want to always be working at the same volume consistently. But let's see what he says as he keeps talking about it.
If you possibly can. Okay, there's one thing to turn it up and make sure that your beats or drums or whatever are hitting hard. But once you're past that point, find a volume, stick with it, and work from there.
Now, for some guys that have a room that's just, it's their bedroom, it doesn't sound good, and no matter what monitors you put in there, it's gonna sound bad, and they end up mixing a lot with headphones. Can you work well with headphones? Can you still do a lot of things there? And if you know your headphones well and you know how they sound, you're A-Bing, you're referencing.
If you're used to headphones, it's gonna work for you. If you're used to speakers, it's gonna work for you. There's no rules, okay? It's whatever you listen to, whatever you're used to, whatever you're comfortable with. If you're in your bedroom, which a lot of people are, in a small room, even more reason to listen quiet. As you turn it up, the room reacts and it doesn't give you a good feature. So listening.
So let me again interrupt him here. Actually, this isn't correct. Yeah, so the perception of sound changes with volume, as I just mentioned, but acoustics is not a nonlinear system. Yeah, so it doesn't matter whether you listen to, or rather the room response doesn't change just because you change the volume. Yeah, but your perception of the sound changes. And so there are advantages to working quietly in an untreated room, because your hearing system actually becomes more sensitive in some ways to the important parts of the mix. So I mentioned the frequency response thing before, right? So with quieter volumes, your focus will actually move towards kind of the mid frequencies, and that's where the most important parts of the mix kind of lives, of the music lives. Yeah, the music is in the mids. And so as you turn it down, you're focusing your attention to the most important parts of the mix. On top of that, and potentially because of this change of frequency response, you actually become more sensitive to transients, to the dynamics in the music. So it actually becomes easier to hear volume changes, both kind of on a macro and on a micro level. So you'll be able to hear compression, how compression affects the music better at low volumes than at high volumes. You'll be able to distinguish plosives, for example, better. Like if you're de-essing, or if a vocal is very kind of aggressive with their plosives, with their consonants, you can hear that and better, and then as a consequence also control it in a more consistent way at lower volumes. Now, that said, I just said you shouldn't be changing the volume. What do? Well, basically what you want to do is you want to have a set number of volumes to work at. And typically that is probably 2 at a minimum, maybe 3, right? So you have your standard volume to work at. Yeah, that is kind of your average listening level where you will work the majority of the time. Then you have a low volume setting, which you use for what I just said, kind of paying attention to transients, to do kind of detailed transient work, but also to some extent perhaps focusing on the mids. And then you might have a third very high volume just to check what you said before, how much fun it is to basically listen at high volumes. I personally don't really see much kind of benefit from working at very high volumes or even listening to the mix at very high volumes. It doesn't really tell you anything useful. But at that point, you basically end up with kind of 3 volume levels that you want to switch between. Yeah? So the ideal volume knob isn't really a volume knob. It is actually a kind of a controller with 3 buttons on it for 3 volumes levels. Yeah? And obviously, you could have a dial in the back to adjust each of those levels. But your standard volume controller, for example, usually has a dim knob. A dim button, sorry. Yeah, so you could use that in conjunction with the standard non-dimmed volume level to give you 2 distinct volume levels to work at. Yeah, but let's continue.
Listening quietly. Some guys are happy with doing it on their laptop. Whatever works. So keep your monitoring consistent and keep it focused, but really listen to something you know is a winner before you start.
That's good. And what I take from there is know your monitor, whatever it is, just know it really well. And then if your room is really bad, try and keep it as low as possible so you don't get too much of the reflections and all the bad.
Too much opinion from the room.
Funny how he didn't pick up on the fact that he said listen at the same volume all the time, right?
And don't use this song to be the song you try the new speakers with. That's a mistake.
Chris, what's the next one?
The next tip is, now that we are looking and listening, make sure you have their rough mix and make sure you have that in a place where you can go back and forth and A/B it, okay? If you're monitoring and we have some meters to look at, okay, when you make sure that you can use a monitor controller, okay? This is very important. If you can use a monitor controller to hit one button to go back and forth between you and them, you, them. You, them. And make sure that level is just fine-tune it until it's the same.
Okay, so talking referencing, right? So design a setup, build a system in your DAW, however you want to do it, so that you can switch between your references potentially, and the mix that you're working on. Yeah, and so that you can switch on the touch of a button. You don't have to go in and open a plugin and then kind of resize it and like push the solo button and then mess with the volume. That time period is way too long. In order to get even a chance of an objective comparison, the switch between your mix and any reference needs to be absolutely immediate because our auditory memory is so short. Yeah, so the faster, the more immediate that change is, the better your ability will be to notice any changes or any differences between the 2 pieces that you're listening to, right? And let's see, I'm sure he's going to talk about that in a second, but the second part of this is that your references need to be at exactly the same volume as your mix. Because if they're not at the exact same volume, then this thing about the change in the frequency response comes back in, right? Obviously, not just your monitor controller controls the volume, but just the level that the track is set in your DAW, the level at which it kind of exits through the mix bus, through the master bus, determines how loud it comes out of the speakers, right? And so you need to fix the volume on your monitor controller, but you also need to set the volume of your mix and your references and stick to them. And that is actually a bit of an art. It takes some practice to work in a way that your output level isn't constantly fluctuating as you're moving around the volume knobs or the faders, the volumes of your individual tracks in your mix. Yeah, but let's see if he actually mentions that.
So you, them, this way you're looking for, a keyboard part, a bass drum part, a background vocal, an effect, okay? They have this, they don't have this. You know, they have their rough mix, they don't have what you did. So everything you don't pay attention to, they're gonna find wrong with what you're doing. So make sure that when you're working on something, that the last thing they listen to is what you reference, and you reference it at a level that's exactly the same as what you're doing.
There you go.
So you can really be on board to get inside their head before you add what you want.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that. I thought that was really, really interesting. I love when we get these little nuggets of wisdom from pro mixers that you don't often hear, but that are really fundamental to the mixing process, to the monitoring process in this case. So I hope you got something out of that. Thanks for watching. Let's get back to learning to trust our ears, having fun making music in the studio. I'll see you in the next video.